Julius puts up a three. And a goal!
Bearcat Blitz. Russ Eltman coming at you on the Believe Network, presented by Bet Online. I'm your host, Russ Eltman of allbearcats.com, now bearcatstalk.com. Of course, joined by my co-host across the way there, Neil Meyer from bearcatstalk.com as well, and the front office news.com. Got some interesting news and notes to get to about the Cincinnati Bearcats today in terms of football and basketball. Looks like Chattanooga transfer wide receiver and for a few months part of the UAB program, Jacoy Mays, going to be heading to Cincinnati and continue his career there. Cincinnati's wide receiver room just night and day better in terms of depth at this point in the calendar compared to 2023. We'll touch on no love for the Bearcats quarterback room, specifically Brendan Sorsby in the 24/7 Sports Big 12 QB hierarchy. Just going to have to earn it. It looks like Neil and I will go through that. And we also have the latest Hoops portal contact from Cincinnati. Another big man reached out to as the hopes for Dylan Mitchell becoming a Bearcat getting slimmer and slimmer by the day. We'll close the show with that news as well. But first, I want to tell you about Bet Online. It's your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from MLB, golf, NBA, and NHL. All of those playoff stats and news up to date on Bet Online. Get all the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams and the latest lines, including the latest team matchups as well, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Bet Online, where the game starts. Take a quick break, and then we'll get into Jacoy Mays signing with the Cincinnati Bearcats. Well, committing to play for the Cincinnati Bearcats. Still got to put pen to paper and make it official. Back at it here on Bearcat Blitz. I'm your host, Russ Eltman. He's my co-host, Neil Meyer. And the Bearcats have a new wide receiver in the fold in Jamoy Mays. Jamoy, a 5'11 playmaker, 62 catches, 1,037 yards, 4 touchdowns at the FCS level last season for Chattanooga. Neil, strong statistics. A guy that I think could come in, make a decent little role for himself here as maybe a potential kind of Z receiver, Y receiver, mixing around in the formation a little bit. Maybe a little too small to play that full-on X role on the outside permanently, but a guy that could give Cincinnati some versatility and just adds to a receiving depth chart that I'll touch on once you get done retorting here, but it's looking pretty strong compared to last season.
Yeah, absolutely. In the wide receiver room heading into the 2024 season, Russ, is night and day from what it was at this time last season, heading into the 2023 season. But they bring in a new addition in Jamoy Mays. Obviously, this is a guy, as you mentioned, he spent time at Chattanooga, Tennessee, and then spent the spring at UAB. Finished with 62 receptions last season at Chattanooga, 1,037 yards, 4 touchdowns. Stands about 5'11", close to 190, 195 range. But this is a guy that you can kind of put in those different Y and Z positions there, Russ. You can kind of move him around a little bit more. Still a little bit on the shorter side for your typical X receiver, as you mentioned. But overall, I like this addition. Now you have 2,000-yard receivers from previous schools with Tony Jefferson. And now you have in Jamoy Mays as well via transfer portal. And then you have guys like Xavier Henderson, who was a leading receiver for the Bearcats last season. So overall, the wide receiver room, Russ, it's looking night and day difference. And it's going to be a room to really keep an eye on. Obviously, that was a big piece of priority in the transfer portal this offseason, was bolstering that wide receiver room. And now that you add another guy like Jamoy Mays, I think the wide receiver room only got better. And all 85 roster spots are filled. Scholarship spots are filled too, Russ. So that's another interesting thing we can lean into, is now there is no open scholarships on the football team. And I think this is what this wide receiver room will look like. I think everyone has their roles. I think it's kind of shaping out to be what they expect to be heading into the 2024 season.
I think 6 or 7 open roster spots last year in terms of scholarships, none entering the mid part of May heading into 2024 season. That's great to see, Neil. Obviously, with the upheaval, you have 3 different levels of transition in terms of roster, coach, and full-on program going to a new school, new conference at that, a jump up in talent level in conference. So the fact that you kind of just that it tends to happen with that kind of transition where you don't fill up all the spots necessarily with scholarship guys. They don't have that issue this year. You got an entrenched program now. You got a culture starting to build. You got a coaching staff that's got their feet underneath them in terms of recruiting class acumen, in terms of transfer portal acumen and what they want out of the portal. And when we look at what they have obtained wide receiver wise, it's looking pretty strong. Evan Prater leads the way in terms of class ranking on down. Prater didn't play much in the spring, didn't play at all in the spring due to injury. We'll see how much of a development track he's taken and how advanced he's done in terms of going from quarterback to wide receiver in the fall camp portion of things. Aaron Turner still around. Xavier Henderson looked fantastic this spring. Tyron Smith looked fantastic this spring. You bring in Jamoy Mays. You got Tony Johnson as well to kind of fill that similar type of body type role as Mays. Johnson, another kind of slot receiver type weapon similar to Mays and Aaron Turner. Sterling Burkhalter looked better. He looked like he improved compared to last season in the spring period this year. Barry Jackson Jr., we know he's flashed before and may not be now asked to do as much in his redshirt freshman season as he might have been asked to do earlier on. And then you have the freshmen there and Cale Woodburn, Dakari Anderson, and Elijah Jones. Woodburn, a guy who got a ton of run in the spring and was able to separate a lot. You and I, Neil, were impressed by him throughout the entire month-plus stretch there at Nippert Stadium. So when we look at this offense, you have a fully returning offensive line. You have your bell cow back returning in Corey Kiner and a deeper running back room at that behind Kiner. The tight end room, we talked about that being a possible skeleton key for this offense with how much it's improved and how much they've been able to solidify that spot. And then the rest of the offense there, in terms of wide receiver, you have now fully cemented that group with strong depth and guys that you got to be pretty confident, especially at the top there with Mays, with Henderson, with who else? Aaron Turner, Tyron Smith. I'm way more confident, Neil, this year that they could consistently get guys to get open, that they aren't going to have to rely on Xavier Henderson to do all of the heavy lifting this year like they did last year. Things are set up as we transition in this football topic to Brendan Sorsby getting ranked 14th out of 16 quarterbacks in the Big 12. Seems a little a little poor of a ranking to me, Neil, for Brendan Sorsby, considering how much better this situation is heading into 2024 for the Bearcats quarterback compared to Emory Jones and the situation he had going into his lone season in Cincinnati.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you, Russ. I think that is a little bit too low for a guy like Brendan Sorsby. I mean, you're looking at the
more
list
like
right
11
now.
to 12 seems more like where he should be.
11 or 12 seems a little bit more right, but the guys ahead of him, TCU's Josh Hoover, Brendan Morton from Texas Tech, Alan Bowman, who's been around for 8 years, it feels like, Donovan Smith from Houston, DeQuan Finn from Baylor, Rocco Bett from Iowa State. So, I mean, there's a toss-up anywhere between 8 to 14, I believe, personally. I think you can put those in different orders, however you may pluck and choose.
And this is the Carter Johns 24/7 sports quarterback rankings for all the Big 12. If people want to pull that up and look at it, parse through it as we're talking about it here.
Yeah, but I think right now the circumstances for Brendan Sorsby being 14 is something that it's going to prove a lot of people wrong because, Russ, as you just mentioned it's a lot better of a situation than what Emory Jones came into a season ago. Emory Jones came in the spring, had to learn the new offense. He had a quarterback battle for a while, and people forget about that because Ben Bryant transferred out after the spring to Northwestern, where he goes on to win a starting job, leads Northwestern to a bowl victory. Emory Jones comes in, has to kind of learn the playbook and everything. Things didn't go as what people had maybe planned for the Emory Jones year in Cincinnati. But now Brendan Sorsby comes in right away. They made him a priority in the transfer portal. They get him on campus, lock him down. You get a whole offensive line returning. You get Corey Kiner in a very deep running back room, as you mentioned, with now bringing in Ohio State transfer Evan Pryor and Chance Williams behind him. Those two also looked really great in the spring. And then you get a whole revamped tight end position. Obviously, Joey Belgian's back healthy. You get Joe Royer in the mix again. And then you have Gavin Grover standing out. Like, the tight end position looks like a whole different room from what it was a season ago. And then the wide receiver room, Russ, I think the offense is really going to be kind of coming together. I think the offense is set. I think you know what you're going to expect on the offensive side of the ball for Cincinnati. But it's for Brendan Sorsby, it's a lot better of a situation than what a guy like Emory Jones came into a year ago. And we even asked Brendan Sorsby about how his comfortability with the playbook after the spring game.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up. Yeah.
Where he said he's about a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10 with his comfortability level with the playbook and everything. And that's after the spring game. So now you still have, 3-4 months before fall camp to learn that playbook, get ready to go for fall camp before the Big 12 opener there at the beginning of September. So overall, there's still plenty of time for him to learn the playbook. But I think 14 for Brendan Sorsby is a little bit too low, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think 11, like we were saying, 11 to 12 seems more justified. But I get it. I mean, you compare two transfer situations here, and DeQuan Finn, who comes over from a massive year at Toledo, was monstrous, and was a guy that Cincinnati was actually interested in a little bit. They had made contact with Finn before he ultimately decided to go to Baylor. He gets ranked 9th, and then you got a guy in Sorsby, similar kind of situation, transfers from a power conference school at that, not even a mid-major school in Toledo, a power conference school in Indiana, but only 7 starts. Didn't have the track record that Finn has, and then you get him 6 spots lower, in my opinion, because of that. And also, just like you look at the bottom 3 teams here, Neil, it's really just the teams that many are expecting to be the worst 3 teams in the conference this coming year in Cincinnati, Arizona State, and BYU. UC's got to prove them wrong. They did not do any of that last year, getting picked. I think they did get picked 2nd or 3rd last in the conference last year among all the coaches or in the media poll, and they finished dead last with 3 wins, the lowest total this century, as we've said on the show too many times. We won't keep hammering that. Football solidifying. It feels like the roster is set. The scholarships are doled out. The coaching staff is now kind of feel like, Neil, you shift focus from the transfer portal now to that class of 2025, starting to nail down those commitments. We know late spring, early summer is when a lot of these guys start committing before they start their summer camps at high school football, and they just get that out of the way before their senior year. So shifting focus now for the Cincinnati football program to the class of 2025 and the recruiting side of things after an interesting portal for Cincinnati, kind of wrapping that up, looking at who they got out of the transfer portal in this cycle. At least we won't go through the entire 20 plus names that they fed through in the last 6 months total, but Jordan Robinson from UK, Xavier Lozawicki from Maine, Max Fletcher from Arkansas, Cam Rutherford from Southeast Missouri State, I believe that is, Harris Adams Southeast Missouri State is Harris Adams. Rutherford is the guy from who is he from? He's from I can't remember. Arkansas Pine Bluff. There we go.
Yep.
Arkansas Pine Bluff. All
Yep.
these FCS schools, they get me. Jake Galday, which we didn't talk about him, Neil, coming over from an FCS school as well. Linebacker. Mm-hmm. He is committed to the program also. Galday coming from Central Arkansas. And then we also have, who did I just forget to put in there? Jamoy Mays as well, the wide receiver. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spring transfers for UC football, kind of making up a total of 23 incoming transfers for Cincinnati. Compare them to a school like Clemson, who has 0. And there's just a lot of different ways to go about running your college football program in today's day and age. And Cincinnati has made their tweaks, and feels like, Neil, Scott Satterfield, as we close out this segment, has his team. He has kind of shaped his team over the past 18 months. They've flushed out guys from Luke Fickell era. Almost all the Luke Fickell guys are mostly gone now. There's still a few left, but it feels like as much as you can, 18 months into a tenure, Scott Satterfield has shaped this roster the way he wants to. And now Bearcats fans are wondering if he can shape the roster into winning ways the way they want to see starting in 2024.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Obviously, they got their roster set heading into the middle of May, which is obviously a great sight. But it's going to be interesting to see how this season plans out. Obviously, from year 1 to year 2, they knew they had to make the improvements, and they go out and they address that in the transfer portal, bringing in nearly 20 new faces again, whether it's the transfer portal or incoming freshmen. So overall, I think this roster, Russ, I think Scott Satterfield and this staff did a great job in filling that spot. Obviously, there's some guys that we haven't been able to see in person yet in live action due to just new transfers and everything. But overall, if you ask me right now, I think the Bearcats roster is sitting in great hands compared to what it was last season. I know last season the over-under was 4.5 in terms of wins. This season, I believe it's 5.5. So a little bit higher of expectations for the Bearcats this year. But looking at the schedule and everything, I think they're definitely able to accomplish that. But you got to like what Scott Satterfield and the staff have done with the roster rebuild from year 1 to year 2.
Getting to the basketball side of things after these messages on Bearcat Blitz presented by Bet Online. Neil Meyer, Russ Heltman with you all on Bearcat Blitz, presented by Bet Online. We are, of course, from bearcatstalk.com. Check out bearcatstalk.com. Whatever internet browser you use, find us all over the place. And you can find some more transfer portal contact, unfortunately, out of the Bearcats in recent days. Dylan Mitchell visit happened mid last week, Neil. And as is typically the gauge point for these type of transfer portal murmurings and happenings, the further you get from an official visit, the further you get from that player being on campus, the less and less likely it is that they will commit to your program. I don't think it's completely off the table yet, but with him following some major teams in recent days, reported or saw him follow on Instagram, Auburn, men's basketball recently, just the fact that they don't have him locked down, the fact that they weren't able to lock it down, get things set up and cinched and cemented last week makes me a lot less confident and more confident by the minute that we are on the show without any breaking news that Dylan Mitchell will be the final piece of the puzzle scholarship-wise for Cincinnati.
Yeah, and it is interesting, as you mentioned, Russ, because in this situation of the transfer portal era, as you mentioned, it seems the more and more less likely that a player is able to commit in this era until you get them on campus for that official visit. And as you mentioned, Dylan Mitchell was on campus last week. We haven't heard any rumblings or murmurs of what might be potentially going down, but as you mentioned, he did give Auburn a follow on Instagram, so not too sure what to expect from there. But overall, that is something that could have been a very final piece. I wouldn't say they're completely out of the running, but it's still something to keep an eye on. But it's still a very big, significant situation to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, when we look at just what else is happening around the transfer portal for Cincinnati, it's essentially one spot left. As we mentioned, we've been talking about it for the past couple weeks. They have not added a name to the roster since what? Arrington Page, right, Neil? He was the last one to jump on, and that was on what? Back on mid-April we were in there.
Yeah,
so it's
about
been
a month
almost
ago.
Yeah, we're going on 4 weeks now since this has been a one scholarship spot scenario for Cincinnati. We talked about Atiki getting contacted last week. Didn't last long. He committed to New Mexico very quickly. Some guys still out there on the board, Neil. Seydou Traore, Miles Kelly, Cedric Coward, Johan Traore, Chaz Lanier, Langdon Hatton still out there as well. Hatton, a guy I think would be a really awesome, ideal ad, and a guy that probably, in terms of these big game hunts, you're not going to be dealing with the likes of Auburn or some of these other power conference schools for his talents. And then a new addition today, Issa Muhammad out of UT Martin Skyhawks. And they've also contacted, well, then not necessarily officially contacted, Aker from Samford. There's been no official report of him getting offered by UC, but the coaches have been following him according to this awesome portal tracker, Bearcat Bunch. Got to shout out the Bearcat Bunch. They do great work with getting all the scholarship stuff in order and tracking all of these transfer portal contacts on the basketball side. Looking at Issa Muhammad, this latest addition to the board, which was added by Bearcat Bunch earlier today, and it looks like it is a official contact by UC reported by the Portal Scoop. Heard from the likes of Indiana, Georgia Tech, Utah, New Mexico, some of the schools in the mix with Issa Muhammad. 6'9", 245 pounds, averaged 11.1 points, 9.4 rebounds, and 1.8 assists on 51% shooting last season. He was very, very strong all across the floor. Only took half a three per game, shot it at 26.7%. So not really a threat in that sense, but transferred from New Mexico State to UT Martin, looking to transfer again. And looks like, Neil, he has about 2 years of eligibility left, maybe 1 year of eligibility left. I'll go ahead and parse through that once you retort, but continuing to scrape the barrel, scrape through the front court coffers to see what they can get for that final scholarship spot, which looks like it's going to go towards a big man in some kind of capacity.
Yeah, and it's a great thing you mentioned that too, Russ, because it does look like it's going to go to a front court player. And I mean, that's something you and I have talked about quite a bit on this show of what we would like to see with the final scholarship spot and what kind of player we'd like to see them target. But based on all the players they are contacting, it does look like it will appear to be a front court player, which is great, a great depth piece potentially, or whatever might come out of it, because you have Aziz Bandego, Tyler McKinley, Arrington Page, and then you get another depth piece there in the front court is something that you can never go wrong with. And there's still a lot of great players out there. Obviously, we've talked about a couple of them, Langdon Hatton, Chaz Lanier, Miles Kelly, a couple to keep an eye on. But overall, Russ, I mean, look at that front court position. I think if you land another big front court there, I mean, we saw what Cincinnati was able to do last year in terms of matching up with other teams, whether that was go 4 out, 1 big, or if there was able some matchups, they were able to play the 2 big, which is something we saw earlier in the Big 12 slate. Not towards the end. We saw the 1 big lineup more towards the end, but depth in the front court is going to be huge, especially going up against teams like Kansas, like Baylor. I mean, Hunter Dickinson's returning for Kansas again. Baylor's going to have another good team. Texas is going to be really good again. There's going to be a lot of teams in the Big 12 that are going to have some depth in the front court, and you can never go wrong with depth. But Russ, based on the portal entries and who they have been reported to be in contact with, it's fairly easy to say that it is going to go to a big front court player, to say the least.
With you on that one for sure. And looking at Issa Muhammad, interesting career out of this guy. Has bounced around a little bit. Started out at Daytona State College in Florida, 2019-20 season there. Spent the next season there as well. Then went to Northwest Florida State College in 21-22. Spent his junior season at New Mexico State, senior season at UT Martin. I'm not exactly sure, Neil, how the eligibility transfers from JUCO to the Division I level, but has already expended 2 years of Division I eligibility. I would guess he has 2 more years of Division I eligibility, but not exactly. Do you know exactly how that works? I'm pretty sure he has 2 more years of D1 eligibility.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain it's 2 years, but
okay,
with all the transfer stuff going on, it's very, very hard to certain, because it's basically a similar situation with Day Thomas. Day Thomas comes to Cincinnati from JUCO, but he only has 2 years of eligibility left. So it's one of those
maybe he might have used 2 years already, had a redshirt year count as the JUCO year, and he has 1 season left.
Yeah,
we'll know for sure if Cincinnati signs him, and we know for sure that the those dastardly COVID years, man, they're finally going away. We don't have to worry about having to count that extra 5th year. You can just go by, did they redshirt or not? That's how much eligibility they got.
Yep.
Figure it out that way. Neil Meyer, Russ Eltman. It's been a lot of fun on this Bearcat Blitz presented by Bet Online.
This is the second. 15 seconds left. Shot clock off. 4-point game. DeJulius puts up a 3.